So good. All right, everybody, welcome. We've got another episode of Lifestyle Medicine. Today we've got Cory Nyenhuis, who's a licensed acupuncturist. And where are you out of, Cory?
Omaha, Nebraska.
Beautiful. I love it. So you and I kind of connected via the Tucson connection through Jared Lash
Yeah.
and studying Tim Cartmel, hsing-i, traditional Chinese martial arts. Why don't you give the audience a little bit of background to, like what you do, how you found your spot, your background a little bit, and then we'll jump into the goodies.
All right on. Well, we have to jump in the Wayback Machine. And my mom took me to see The Karate Kid in 1985.
Yeah.
I loved it. I Ever since then, I was always wanted martial arts, martial arts, martial arts. Um, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, so I could go to a program at the Y here and there.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy, nothing spectacular. And then I want to say when I was about 16, mom became a nurse, so there was a little more income. So I started training at an actual private dojo. Did more Tang Soo and Eskrima,
Mm.
which was kind of cool. I'd never seen Eskrima before, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, sticks.
Yeah. And then when I was about 20, I had fallen off for a couple years. About 20, I was just flipping burgers, wasting time because I was not a good college student in my earlier college career.
Yep.
And I started watching Kung Fu: The Legend Continues on TV.
David Carradine. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yep.
remake they did,
Okay.
where it was like his grandson was, but he was David Carradine in both of them.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I should get back into martial arts. I always loved it. And I did. And I found a Tai Chi instructor who was pretty traditional. And he was the first person that started making that martial art and medicine connection for me.
Yep.
Even to the point where he would just be like, you can't be good at martial arts if you're eating garbage all the time. And I was like, what? This isn't good for me?
Yeah. Groundbreaking information.
Uh-huh. It was pretty. I remember sitting there just going, whoa, Burger King is not healthy.
Who knew?
So the more I trained and the more I would talk to coaches and teachers I had for that first few years in my 20s, I was like, wow, this is really cool. Maybe I should look into like actually going back to school and learning something. And I checked out massage school and I liked it. I did that. The program was good. It was a good foundation. I worked as a massage therapist for a bit, training the whole time. Sort of traditional, but that's when MMA really started to take off. So we started mixing it up a little bit here and there, just various things. And then one day I was like, you know what? I want to do something more than this, more than what I got going on. And I started researching chiropractic, acupuncture, and actual med school.
Mm-hmm.
And going to med school at 25, 26 is not easy.
It's like behind the curve, technically. Right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So a couple teachers and some close friends, I was talking to them, just for some advice. And one of my chiropractor buddies says, Cory, knowing you as long as I have, why don't you really look into Chinese medicine schools? It's kind of everything that you're looking for in a health modality, and you already kind of have this background. And I did, and I ended up in Tucson, which is where I met Jared Lash.
Yep.
We were both training at the North American Tong Shida at the time. And so we kind of formed that connection. And then fast forward a couple years, Jared sends me a random invite on Facebook saying he's hosting Tim Cartmel, who I've been a fan of since always. I even looked him up once way back when he had his own shop in Garden Grove.
Right.
And so I was like, hell yeah, Jared, I'm in, woohoo.
Yeah.
And I've been going ever since. Whenever he has Tim come out, I go down. I've been out to see Tim once in LA before all the COVID weirdness came along.
Yep.
And I just love to train. I love to learn. That's kind of it.
Yeah, that's kind of the backdrop. Well, I think you touched on a good point, which is one, you and I share a very similar thread, which was when I got into Chinese medicine school, the way I found Chinese medicine school was actually through a bunch of Tang Shidao martial artists. So
Yeah.
started training with them, and they dropped that ball. They said, well, martial arts and medicine are sort of like yin and yang. They're the two halves. And if you're not studying both, you're kind of getting half of the pie. You need to have both to make a cohesive whole. And it really sort of established this thing, I think, which is cool about Chinese medicine, which I think you can appreciate it, which is martial arts and medicine feed one another. And
Yeah.
if you're studying these arts that way, it's a complete picture. It's the whole pie. And what's cool about it is that Chinese medicine is so old, and a lot of the arts are very old. So they have this old, systematic approach to exercise that like feeds the actual medicine tradition itself.
Yeah.
Which we really don't have in the West. I mean, there's definitely, Western exercise is good for the heart and whatnot, but it's a lot more enmeshed with Chinese medicine.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting and pretty cool. So for the people that are listening, let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about, I would love to hear your take on it. I've got my thoughts, which people have heard
Sure.
before, but I would love to hear your thoughts on sort of how that works. When you look at Chinese martial arts, the movements, the meridian systems and all of that stuff that kind of goes with Chinese medicine in relation to the movement arts, talk about that connection a little bit, just so people can kind of have a framework if they're not hip to it.
Yeah. So I kind of view it as in the medical model, you have these maps of, your anatomy, physiology, etc. And that's true across any medical model.
Yeah.
The Chinese medical model has some specialty ones, the meridian system, the acupoints, the circadian clocks, how the organs work in relation to the time in the year.
Yep.
There's exercises that they developed over millennia that can activate, deactivate some of those patterns, those maps. They work better on those. So I always thought that was neat that, when we have a patient come in that maybe has some tension, but it's more than a muscular tension. It's like a mental tension, maybe a tension in their external life. They're having like this, they're not moving forward at work or something. And you show them a liver qigong and it brings that anger down, that tension out of their head. They feel better in their body, and they're easier to adapt to the situation at work.
Right.
And I think that's neat because then that same exercise, when you adapt that to fighting, it's not hard to make that jump to moving your arms back and forth to throwing good punches,
mm-hmm.
Or grappling somebody.
Yep.
So I always thought that was neat, the way every little thing was systemized. They spent so much time studying nature and the body and how things work together that, you want to be good at kicking, well, here's the exercises for that, but that'll also help your back pain.
Yeah.
If you get good at this.
Right. Which is a bonus.
That kind of blows my mind. It's kind of neat when you start comparing it to things that Western biomedicine is doing now with exercise science.
Right.
And they're going, there's this connection here if you do this exercise, and so they're kind of starting to figure that out.
Right.
It's not fringe as much as it used to be probably even 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
I just think that's fascinating to me.
Agreed across the board with everything you're saying. And I think it happens with Western exercise too. People start moving their bodies and they quote unquote feel better. There's going to be some improvement in mood, basic flexibility and whatnot. But I think that was an eye opener for me when I started studying hsing-i, bagua, tai chi, the internal quote unquote Chinese martial arts. Got into that, and I was amazed at how the movements were softer than traditional Western exercise, but I was amazed through basic rudimentary movement, back pain reduced, knee pain improved, things that I had from playing rugby and football, from physical injuries. I was amazed. I was like, why are these soft, kind of round exercises that are systemized and very systematic in their approach? Why is this working? Because I think for a lot of Westerners, we kind of get stuck into that model of if it's not explosive, intense, and very 150%, that we're not really doing anything to our body, or it's not a real exercise, or it's not going to be. So there's that soft approach kind of threw me for a spin. And I thought that definitely hooked me. I mean, it got me into all this stuff as well. So what do you do in terms of, you're a clinician, I know you have an acupuncture practice where you live, you see patients, you're treating them in the Chinese medical context. How do you bridge the movement arts into your practice? Is it something that are you teaching? Do you, try to funnel people that way? How do you pitch the idea to them that, these arts, the movement arts, can actually, foster health in the context of what you're doing with them?
I kind of lay it out when we're talking about their treatment plan, the course of action we're going to take to help them feel better.
Yeah.
Quite a few patients we talk to about exercise as therapy, whether it's, jumping in the pool to alleviate some joint aches because you're buoyant in the pool,
Right.
or actually sending them to the Tai Chi class that my friend teaches.
Mm-hmm.
I don't teach a lot right now, mostly just because of life and dad duties and stuff.
Yeah,
but one of my good friends, who's a Chinese martial artist and an herbalist, runs a class here at the clinic. So we'll put people in there because they just need to get moving, to get their blood, their chi, whatever word you want to put in there, moving. I like starting out with something soft like Tai Chi because everybody can do it.
Yeah.
There's no bad place to start with Tai Chi. It doesn't matter how big and strong you are or little and frail you are. If you got bad knees, a bad back, or whatever, there's a way to get Tai Chi to fit your body.
Correct.
I mean, you could do that with any martial art, but Tai Chi seems kind of laid out for that.
Yeah.
At least in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something, Tim Cartmel, who we mentioned earlier, he talks about that too. He says everybody can do anything. They just got to start slower.
Right.
And I've heard him say that a few times at the classes that we've done and just listening to him talk. And I thought, what a great approach to bring someone into martial arts or even just movement for their health in general.
Yeah.
You just go slower.
Yeah.
If you get into a position that's too uncomfortable, then you back off. Versus trying to go lift 400 pounds and you're below your knees out.
Yeah. Well,
So yeah, I mean, we do that a lot for sure.
Yeah. I agree. He's very good at that. And he helped dispel that, I'm only 38. And when I talked to him about training jiu-jitsu, I was like, oh, but if I start now, am I too behind the curve? The same way you said about going to med school at 25, right? You're like, oh, it's too late. And I remember talking to him about that, and he said, no, just go slow. He's like, don't go in there and train with the MMA guys who are looking to do it that way. But if you go slow, there's a lot of benefits. So I think that's a beautiful thing to look at. So what have you noticed in terms of, personally, you as an individual practitioner of martial arts and then of the medicine, what's been your dynamic in terms of, how much you're training, how much you're treating, what's that relationship like, and how much they feed each other? What have you seen in terms of the connection between training the movement arts and then your own personal, distribution of the medicine?
Sure. Well, my base always was martial arts before it was medicine.
Yep.
I remember I was having kind of a rough patch in my early 20s, and I could always come back to Kung Fu class, to martial art. Could always go. It was my safe spot. I felt better when I went. And that was actually kind of the catalyst. When I would feel better, I would want to do it more. So I started going more.
Right.
And that was kind of a catalyst for the rest of my life, because as I trained more, I went to the bar less. All of those things, it just became my exercise outlet, my social outlet, my mental health outlet. And it's that thing I do. You can't remove it from my life now.
Yeah.
It's that part.
Yep.
When I started to transition into the study of medicine, it wasn't that hard to put that in there, because it's just another extension of that old, my Kung Fu, so to speak. So I look at my practice of medicine and my practice of martial arts, they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
But just going back to that yin yang we were talking earlier, I do the soft side all day and help people feel better. And then 4 or 5 nights a week, I hit the mats and we're training hard. And that's the hard side. That's the yang side.
Yep.
I'm a better clinician the more I train, because I feel better.
Yeah.
So,
fair enough.
And I've back in January, I broke my shoulder.
Yeah, I remember.
And I couldn't really do anything for a couple months. And not that I will ever admit to being a bad clinician, but definitely, your body hurts. You don't
Yeah.
sleep good.
Yep.
I mean, it's like anybody else that had a rough night or a rough couple weeks,
Right.
your performance is going to fade in certain areas. So I'm sure I was probably, not as stellar as I am right now.
Yeah.
I've been training almost every day now for almost 3 months, doing extra things, enjoying some new workouts that was shown to me recently, just having a good time. And I think it pays off. My patients seem happier. I get results quicker.
Absolutely.
It rubs off. When you feel good, it rubs off on people.
Yeah, it's pretty basic. I mean, I think that's true in most contexts of life, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if the emotions are high, your disposition, your impact is going to be definitely more uplifting. When you were in Tongshidao, what years were you in and how long were you there?
2007 to 2011-ish.
Crazy. So we were in at the same time. We never crossed paths. That's funny. Did you go to any of the national events?
I went and helped out. I was broke grad student at that time.
Yeah.
So I couldn't. I didn't ever participate, but I would. I worked a couple of the cameras and helped out at the events just to be in the atmosphere. I went to some of the smaller events that they had in Tucson.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if we had crossed over, and it kind of leads into my question, though. How much exposure did you have to Vince Black? Did you get to meet him some?
Oh, yeah. I worked in Vince's clinic
cool.
Most of the time that I was in Tucson when I wasn't in school. So it was like every Monday I was there because that was really my only day off from school.
That was the Four Winds. Is that what the where he? So for the people listening, to give context, Vince Black was the founder of the North American Tongshidao Association, and passed. God, it's been 2 years now. Has it been?
Right about, I think so.
Give or take. He passed, but he left a huge mark in terms of martial arts and medicine, and was a very firm believer in this thing that Cory and I are talking about, which is martial arts and medicine go hand in hand. And I was amazed when he really, he was the first guy that really pushed that to where it really solidified the idea I liked. It was good theory and good philosophy, but then the movement arts in terms of just keeping your body structurally sound and strong physically, especially if you do tuina or body work or any kind of manipulation for the body.
Correct.
The martial art pieces keep your body strong. And the people that did this stuff seem to last longer. They don't burn out as quickly. Because that's pretty common, right? With people that are body workers and health workers, they get burned out, whether you're doing manipulation or just the emotional side. I think all those things, the martial arts kind of train and keep you tonified and strong. So that's a beautiful thing. So Cory, let's go into, we had talked about prior to this podcast, we had talked about your sort of exposure and moving into the functional medicine spectrum within Chinese medicine. Yeah. And I, immediately when you said that, I got excited because I thought, functional medicine is really cool. For one, people, it seems to be, it's a big wave now, people moving towards functional medicine where they're getting in and working on gut health, or there's so many different spectrums within functional medicine. So what took you into functional medicine and what are you doing with it? And let's just open that can of worms.
Right on. Yeah. So having that strong base in strictly Chinese medicine and that strong base in the classical family style medicine that I learned from the Tongshidao and just some other teachers, because I actually had 3 or 4 teachers that were classically trained in various forms of Chinese medicine.
Will you give just a real quick side tangent to that? What does that mean? For the people.
Okay.
What's classical Chinese medicine mean?
So classical would be more the medicine they taught, kind of Western. I forget what they call that period, where all the colonialism in China and it was kind of that old world medicine. Taught how it was before biomedicine, Western medicine really made a mark in China.
Yep.
Before the Western civilization really made a mark in China.
Yep.
But really before the communist takeover in China,
Yeah.
where they tried to systemize all the folk medicine
Right.
that was done in China.
Yep.
So family styles versus more of the intellectual textbook. Here's, read these books and then get out of here kind of
Yeah.
approach.
Can I add to that? And it's more.
Yeah,
It's
for
kind.
sure.
It's kind of a question too, because I don't claim to be a Chinese historian. I've definitely read the texts, but I would love to hear your. This is kind of the way it's been shared with me, and it's very similar to what you just said. When Mao came into power and the Cultural Revolution happened in China, when qigong, the practice of movement arts, these things were seen as superstitious, and people were actually shot and killed in parks, from what I heard, when people were practicing, because it was seen as religious dogma at the peak of when things were their worst. But like what you just said was there was the way I've kind of heard it too is, and correct me if I'm wrong from what you've heard, but the shamanistic threads, when there was almost a more spiritual thread to the medicine, like you said, when it was a little more organic and less westernized, because Mao apparently was pretty big on systemizing the medicine and sort of getting rid of all things that, I don't know what you want to call it, that seemed outside of the range of what's acceptable in the Western mind.
Yeah.
And then from there, the medicine took a pretty big hit, and modern TCM is sort of what we've gotten in the West, which is sort of a more Western systemized version of Chinese medicine. And classical was when it was a little more abstract, a little more intuitive, maybe a little more emotional. Would you say that's, kind of sort of what you've heard? And if not, what would you change?
That's fairly accurate. When I was training with all these guys, it was not a real shamanistic approach, but it was just more of the, what do you call it, apprenticeship approach.
Yeah. Oral tradition, person to person.
Yeah. And just really hands-on all the time. Vice sitting in class all day, memorizing point names and actions and,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some varying histories about it.
It's hard to track. Yeah.
Right. And kind of the big one that I got, and you can see this sometimes, there's some guys doing some really awesome translations of some really old Chinese medical texts now. Mm-hmm. And when they doing these translations, it's coming up the way, and this is going to lead into my functional medicine.
Yeah.
It's kind of comes up that way, that's probably what they were talking about, but they didn't have the language to really express it then.
Right.
So it sounds very shamanistic or, folksy.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think about this all the time. I'm like, well, in a time when you didn't have laboratories and you didn't have, molecular science and all of this stuff, I feel like the language would have to be more intuitive and kind of artistic to a degree, because you don't have these hard set parameters and microscopes and these things. So the languaging is going to be different. And I should clarify a little bit, Jeffrey Yuen, who's a prominent Chinese medicine guy, when he says shamanistic, it's not someone with a rattle just, taking psychedelics and trying to like bridge the world. He's like, yeah, those people existed. But what it really meant is when they looked at the larger natural cycles, when they actually considered cosmology, when they actually looked at environmental rhythms, feng shui, they looked at these larger things that impacted human beings. And that's kind of what the term, shamanistic, when he talks about that, it's just that.
I agree with that. I'm glad you said that, because that was not where I was thinking when you said shamanistic first either.
Totally. I think the way they, at least from what I've read, when Jeffrey talks about it, he talks about like Chinese shamanism was basically people who just attended to, listened, observed, and integrated natural rhythms. He's like, if they were doing that, that's quote unquote shamanism in the Chinese medicine world. So
sure.
In any case, that was a tangent. I pulled you off, but run back into the functional medicine piece.
So learning that way was awesome, and I'm very successful with that. But there's some things that you're not going to cover with that practice style. And that's okay. Fast forward a few years in practice, I was looking for like a practice management coach or a business mentor. And I got introduced to a group that is made up of acupuncturists, chiropractors, MDs, everybody in between. And they have a really strong functional medicine component. once I got exposed to that and saw what they were doing and how it relates to everything I'm doing and how successful they were with it, I was like, whoa, that's really cool. And that's kind of a part of medicine and a part of looking at the body that I wasn't confident with.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting. So I took them up on some of that training. And again, it just snowballs into this, oh, now I got to learn this, this, and this.
Right.
A lot of it is nutrition based, or at least the basis of it is nutrition based. And that's always fascinating to me, the study of nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
So the more, again, I got exposed to that, the more I wanted to learn. There's a really awesome company called Apex Energetics. They put out some fantastic nutraceuticals and supplements, but they have a very strong education department. Took a couple courses with them, took some courses with my business coaches, and some just mentorship through them. And that's really how I got started. And you get a couple successes with patients that you weren't having success with before. And you look at a blood lab now and you go, oh, we should really be focusing on X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And then they come back, instead of saying, yeah, I feel kind of better, they come back and go, I haven't felt this good since 20 years ago.
Right.
And you're on the right path.
Mm-hmm. For the people listening, because I have a weird eclectic range of listeners that listen to my stuff, but when you talk about functional medicine, for the people who are like, what the fuck is functional medicine? Like,
sure, let's break it down.
Yeah, break down. Like, what's functional medicine for the people that don't know
functional medicine, at least the way it was taught to me, is the use of laboratory medicine with nutraceuticals, diet, and lifestyle training.
Yeah.
So we'll take a blood lab, a stool lab, there's a few others, cortisols, like a saliva test, and measure the body functions from there.
Right.
Then you could tailor specific dietary protocol, exercise protocol, and supplementation, whether it's nutraceuticals like vitamins and minerals, Chinese herbs even.
Yep.
You could tailor that specifically to what these tests are showing you.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes a really powerful way to get care to people now. And it's kind of more, imagine Chinese medicine through the lens or the microscope of Western biomedicine.
Right.
So you're kind of using their scope, but focusing it with everything that we did in Chinese medicine. But you're just using their binoculars to come to that conclusion.
Right. I think the coolest thing that I've seen, because I've got a lot of colleagues who are in the functional medicine spectrum. You're one. I've got a lot of people from who I went to grad school with, and I think the coolest thing about the functional medicine piece is that it's a very accessible bridge between. Yeah. It bridges Western medicine and Eastern, medicine, Chinese medicine. It bridges them very nicely because it gives an access point to get the best out of both worlds. And
absolutely.
That's been a big contentious thing, and I'm sure you've seen it too, where Eastern medicine people will get very contentious and like they turn their nose up at Western. We don't need Western medicine, and Western medicine will get the same way. We don't need that. It's all just a bunch of shamanistic bullshit.
Yeah.
And the cool thing with functional medicine is like this is where they can kind of both agree, and you get to pull the gems out of Western medicine that are really good, which is that diagnostic blood work and laboratory work, and then you get to pull in some of these lifestyle pieces, some of the theory that comes out of Chinese medicine, and they meet, and that's what's been so cool is where like it's the link between these two, because I think functional medicine makes you technically an integrative practitioner, where you're saying we need both, right? We need the lens of Western medicine, we need Eastern medicine, and these things meeting in the middle seems to be a good happy medium that gives the best care, or some of the best care for patients.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that. That's a very good way to put it.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating since we started because it made me better at the Western portion. People will come in and go, my doctor said this, and I'm, oh, okay, that relates to this. We can do this, da, da, da. Whereas previous to that, I wasn't as good at doing that. That's some of, my own, but some of that is the Chinese medicine programs don't teach a lot of that, and
Yep.
it's detrimental for some people.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the functional medicine too, because in Western biomedicine, when you're doing lab medicine, blood labs or whatever, their ranges are really broad.
Yeah.
If it could go from 0 to 100. If you fall with anywhere in there, well, that's normal, everything's fine. Well, you could still be symptomatic, so the functional range is very narrow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's optimal function.
Right.
So we try to get you into this window because there's almost no chance you'll be symptomatic in this window.
Yep.
Or at least a lot less symptomatic. Mm-hmm. And that's the goal. And it's really fascinating. I'll explain that to patients. They'll bring me, oh, my doctor said my blood work is fine. Well, yes, technically it is, medically speaking.
Yeah.
Big quotes.
Right.
But you don't feel well. So if we get this number to go here, you should feel better. And then that becomes the goal. They understand that it's easy to point that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of backtracking a little bit on what you said, for Chinese medicine people, when we do Chinese medicine diagnostic assessment, we look at the tongue, we ask about stools, if they're loose, if they're firm, if they're well formed, how many times a day, all these things. But for a lot of the average Americans, they're like, what the hell does, your shit have to do with your health?
Oh, yeah.
What does gut health have to do with health? I mean, these are concepts, I think, for people like us that are associated with it, we're exposed to it, we get relatively well versed in the idea and the theory. But for a lot of modern Americans, they're like, wait a minute, outside of eat your fruits and vegetables and, go exercise, what else is there to health? So why don't you break down a little bit, like, talk about gut health, talk about stool health and what that means when you guys look at that, because I think, and maybe even some of the blood work, because I think those are, if we can orient people to that, I think that's part of what it gets the spark lit. We're like, oh yeah, there's more to health than just, eating fruits and vegetables and, exercising.
Well, yeah. So let's start with gut health. Gut health, it starts with how well does like food sit in your stomach? Mm-hmm. How come I can eat steak and potatoes and feel fine, but I eat an ice cream and I feel terrible?
Yep.
Or how come I can eat an apple and I'm okay, but I eat a banana and I feel bad?
Right.
So there's various factors in that, and you can measure those factors through various lab tests. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of that, no pun intended, your stool, a nice well-formed stool is kind of the hallmark of good digestion and intestines that are working properly.
Yep.
If you're constipated, you only go every 3, 4, 5 days. It's really hard. It's hard to express, or just there's times there's people that don't feel good when they have a bowel movement. It hurts, right. Or it doesn't feel like it's complete. That's a sign that something's not working right. And if you're constantly putting things in the body, you should be constantly getting waste out of the body. Uh-huh. And when one of those things is off, then there's dysfunction.
Right.
So you can pinpoint the dysfunction with some of those tests. So instead of throwing, one of my teachers always called it the shotgun approach versus the sniper approach. Yeah. We can throw the shotgun approach out and give them these formulas that have 30 herbs in them that do all these things, or you dial in your diagnostics and you get the sniper approach and you give them the 1 or 2 things they actually need.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with looking at a blood lab. The range for glucose, so blood sugar, is up to 100. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you an example. I took mine recently. It was 98. Mm. So laboratory medicine says that's fine.
Right.
Functional medicine says I'm too high.
Right.
And with some symptoms, some things that I deal with personally, that's too high. Right. So, we dial things back to get that appropriate. So like I try really hard to be low carb because of that. Mm-hmm. Because I don't need simple sugars in my diet because my body's having a hard time dealing with them.
Right.
So, that's a really good example of a number that can look fine on paper, but doesn't work fine for me, the patient or the person.
And you bring up a key point, which I think is I think the ideal of Chinese medicine, I think medicine in general, is that we sort of you tailor, right, the
Yeah.
approach to people, because people's diets, their genetic heritage, their lifestyle, their emotional stressors, their environmental stressors are so damn different across the
Yeah.
board depending on where you live. I mean, there's so many factors, right? Socioeconomic, status, like you said, genes, all of that stuff. And it's like, your diet compared to your kid's diet is likely going to be different too, because we all
Right.
genetically express differently. And that's the beautiful thing about this stuff, is that you really can tailor and
Hmm.
get in line with what does your body actually need?
Yeah.
What do you actually thrive on? Some people do amazing with beef, some not so much. Some people
Correct.
thrive with chicken, aggravates the hell out of some other people. And I think that's been a game changer for a lot of people when they do these food intolerance tests. They do some blood tests. They see, the stool, what's happening in the gut. Are you not digesting something? Or like you said yourself, right? You do better with a low carb diet, while those really lean, lucky people can thrive on carbohydrates. I'm not one of them either. I have to very much keep carbohydrates to a minimum and keep it to like clean starches and not a lot of grains. So it's different for everybody. So when you do these, say you do the test with somebody, you have a patient come in, you give them the functional medicine panel, you get them to take these tests. Are people, what do you see? Are people, are they open to the idea? Are they surprised when they, shift their diet, how much better they feel? Like, what do you see when people
Oh yeah.
engage this? Like, just kind of in a nutshell, what do you see with people when they jump down this road?
Lately, people are seeking that service out because they're tired of not feeling better.
Right.
They're tired of not getting results
Yeah.
from doctors. And I don't, to caveat this, I don't want to talk bad about doctors, because everybody does the best they can for the patients on how they were trained,
Agreed.
with the time allotted and everything. It's just,
Yep.
it's hard sometimes when you get caught up in a big system,
Sure.
or insurance protocol says I have to do A, B, and C before I can do D and E, even though E is the only one that's going to help you.
Right.
I got to do all these others. So lately the people come in and ask for that. Sometimes you're going to get kickback with most patients of, there's no way I can give up bread. Well, okay, continue to feel like crap.
Or
Thanks, I'll see you later.
yeah, right.
Most of the time, yes. When you can get someone to follow the protocol for, 3 weeks minimum, I would say,
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's going to happen one day where they're going to have that little light on moment and go, I feel better. It didn't hurt when I walked down the stairs, or my stomach didn't hurt when I ate lunch today.
Right.
I had 3 bowel movements, one a day. That hasn't happened in years. And that's,
It's huge.
There's
It's huge.
for someone that constantly battles that, you just change their life. And
Right.
that's amazing. So sometimes I do have the patients where it takes a little more to get some traction. You got to kick them in the ass a little harder.
Sure.
But that's what we're here for at the same time.
Right. Part of your job.
That's kind of how we have our practice set up. I'm the main provider, but I have a health coach, someone that will call and check in on patients,
Right.
see how their diet's going, if they have questions, have they tried this recipe yet, or stuff like that. So having a good team helps that process a lot too.
I guess the question I want to ask is to take the lens out, because the functional medicine takes the lens in, right? It's a laser, like you said, like the sniper or the shotgun.
Yep.
Like the focused. So when we look at, of course, functional medicine is going to give you the sniper view, the really fine-tuned laser beam focus into what's unique to you. What do you see if you take that lens back out and you go kind of broad and general? Because I like to work with broad strokes too, because
Sure.
it's like people are listening to this, right? And they're listening to you talk about this. They're not going to be able to take the blood test right now.
No.
So when we look at the broad lens, what do you see in the broad strokes? What's usually pretty consistent across the board for most people in terms of dietary health, what they can do? Because there do seem to be some common threads of like, don't do this, like don't eat McDonald's, right? There are some key threads. So yeah, in what you've seen with, your dialogue with the functional medicine spectrum, what are some of the big broad strokes that usually, right? No one's going to hold you to it, but usually what's pretty true for like broad spectrum health
Prevalent
for
for a
the
lot of people, too many grains in the diet.
mm-hmm.
Any grain at all. A lot of times for a lot of people in this country,
Right.
because it can be different depending where you are in the world.
Yep.
In this country, most grains are pro-inflammatory.
Right.
It's, they're either the wrong grain or they're grown with toxins and your body doesn't like it.
Yep.
So I have people come in, well, I've been gluten-free for 2 years. I'm like, right, but you're still eating rice and corn and oats because
Right.
they don't have gluten, right? Oh, yeah. Okay, there you go.
Right.
That and deep-fried carbs.
Mm. And Americans love deep fried carbs.
Hell yeah, they taste good.
Tastes amazing.
But, I mean, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the patients that come in that have had issues like that and inflammation issues in general
Yeah.
have those in their diet.
Mm-hmm.
And just a simple diet journal
Yep.
for a week or so can really open your eyes. And again, I did that once, like probably most guys. Whenever I would stop and get gas, sometimes I would like to have a Snickers bar.
Yeah.
So I did a diet journal for about 2 weeks, and I realized that I had like 7 Snickers bars in this 2-week period. And that's not every once in a while. That's eating candy all the time.
Right.
So you don't think about it, but once I wrote it on paper, it became real.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so then you could change that habit then. So yeah, just something simple every evening before bed. Today I ate 2 eggs, an apple, whatever. And then you look at it and oh, wow, I'm doing pretty good. Or, oh, nut.
Right.
Man, I ate fast food 3 times.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of things, like, so it seems like a consistent thread is right. Grains and too many grains or the frying of grains, and deep fried foods where wheat and gluten is usually wrapped in those things. What do you see in terms of the things that people, sort of the positive side? Like, what are the things that usually consistently people, if they add in or if they're focusing more on certain fats, certain proteins, do you see any things like that seem to be, for the most part, usually a good thing?
Yeah. I mean, any high quality meat product. I mean, we're in Nebraska. It's kind of like beef country around here.
Right.
Any good grass-fed beef, people that stick primarily to something quality like that, you get somebody to change, just a little bit, like how they're cooking their vegetables, maybe.
Right.
I mean, it's a night and day difference. You can drop inflammatory markers rather quick, just some simple changes in the diet.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to offend any vegans or vegetarians or whatever, but I eat beef all the time. About 3 months ago, I switched to only grass-fed beef, period. And I notice a difference in my body,
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. Animals that are raised on corn are going to be inflammatory.
Yep.
So if they're fed grain at a stockyard or hen house or whatever it's called, on the chicken farms,
Yep.
that meat is not going to be as high quality as a grass-fed or even hunters. I have a couple patients that are hunters, and whenever they'll bag an extra deer or whatever, and that's some of the best high quality, animal protein you can get.
Absolutely. And it kind of brings back to what you just touched on, kind of brings back to this whole idea of, which I like about Chinese medicine, the naturalistic philosophy.
Yeah.
Let animals eat what they're supposed to eat, their natural, actual, their actual diet, the actual food they're designed for, and they produce it's a healthy animal. Therefore, when you eat it, it's a healthy food. And I mean, that thing you just touched on, which I think is worth mentioning, cows are designed to eat grass. And when they do, the fat they produce is omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory. When they eat a bunch of corn, it's pro-inflammatory omega-6s. And then people eat that and then they get inflammation. And it's those basic natural principles that when we start to see it, it's like if we don't tamper too much with the ecosystem and the natural rhythms of the things that we're eating, that includes vegetables, right?
Absolutely.
Don't inundate them with just a bunch of bullshit chemicals and pesticides that are going to destroy our gut.
That's a huge component of why wheat is toxic for people in this country.
Yeah.
It's not so much that the wheat plant is super toxic to some people, but it's the chemicals they put on it.
Right. And right. That opens up a whole new can of worms
I
too.
know
It's like how
that's
many,
another podcast.
yeah, right. How many directions can we run? Well, that's really cool with the functional medicine piece. So, you've touched on just, I always like to give personal experience because I think personal experience trumps dogma in theory. So in terms of, I know when you probably got into this functional medicine spectrum, you started doing some of these functional medicine tests. So can you kind of give a before and after in terms of like how your lifestyle has shifted as a result of the introduction of functional medicine, like what you were doing before, what you took out, and what you see now?
Well, yeah. Before was kind of, I don't know, it was a little hit and miss nutritionally.
Mm-hmm.
Switching, like I said earlier, to all grass-fed beef,
Yep.
that was because of the functional medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was really learning about inflammatory markers in the body, what causes them, what helps them, etc.
Right.
And then it was kind of a casual conversation with one of my mentors. He grew up on a farm in Iowa. We were talking about meat, blah blah blah, and then he says, "Oh yeah," he says, he mentioned the study, which I would try to bring it up now, but it was so long ago.
Yeah.
But a study where they studied animals that were grass fed or free range versus animals that were pin fed,
Right.
and how this one made inflammation worse and this one was the opposite. So that just kind of got the wheels turning about that. I'm way better at taking vitamins and supplements now than I was before. And I cut my teeth, so to speak, taking raw Chinese herb formulas. So, I mean, some pretty disgusting, nasty decoctions that looked like, the bottom of the river. I live on the Missouri River.
Yeah.
Stuff you would never want to drink. It smells as bad as it looks.
Right.
So I was used to taking all these nasty, bitter herbs, but never really good at taking some of these other supplements and pills and things like that.
Right.
But they just reiterated more why it's important when you're on these programs to take the supplements.
Yeah.
Because you can see it in the markers.
Yeah.
It's not all in your head.
And I think this was a hard thing for me to come to grips with too. And I think people in general, once you go down this rabbit hole a little bit of, what gives you health, what takes life from you, what gives life to you. And it's this, it's a kind of an existential, I don't want to say awakening, but it's an awareness of like, my body doesn't do certain things well. And there are some things that it does do well. And I'm going to have to like take these things to make my body optimal. And I'm not going to be perfect, and it's a losing battle. Nobody gets out alive. But there's a simple truth that like, yeah, your body's going to be deficient in certain functions, in certain, and I think that's true for talents, aptitudes, strengths, coordination. And with diet, I mean, I think now more than ever with the demand that is put on this planet to produce food for everybody, I mean, we have to pay attention to these things. Like what am I supposed to put in my body that's going to make me feel really good? And if you can identify those things, life gets better pretty quick.
Yeah.
Well,
that was going back a little bit with what you just said and what I was talking about functional medicine and how it changed things. Having the lens of Chinese medicine, I knew what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And then having the quantifiable numbers from the functional medicine solidifies even further why I'm only going to buy the best produce I can get, the best meat I can get, the best supplements, it changed that mindset in my brain going, this bottom of the shelf, vegetables in the freezer section is fine versus, wow, that number really came down when I ate this way. So I'm going to keep buying that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What do you, if you're going to, when people listen to this kind of stuff, they're like, oh man, like I want to, jump on the bandwagon and get the blood test and start doing this and really fine tuning. Some people's initial thing in their head is, well, I don't have the funds to do this. I don't have, my means are far simpler. What would you say to people that are listening to this if they want to, at the baseline level, start to improve their health through diet? What would you say to people if they're like, say like for whatever reason? They don't have access to a practitioner like you, given their geography, or they don't have the funds. what would you say are like the kind of rudimentary steps to like, get your health at least back online? What would be, what's kind of like the first steps that you would sort of suggest
What
to people?
I mentioned it earlier is take a diet log.
Mm-hmm.
Track what you're eating.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody eats something. I don't care unless you're some crazy bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to eat something that they don't need in their diet.
Right.
Whether it's, you eat candy bars every day like I was doing, or, you eat 6 bananas a day.
Mm-hmm.
Bananas are actually pretty high in the glycemic index. There's a lot of sugar there.
Yep.
That's not good for you.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is going to eat something that they don't need anymore.
Right.
So by keeping a diet log, you can go back through it and go, oh, yeah, I really don't need to eat this.
Yep.
I actually remember I didn't feel good the last time I had that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing now. When you eat your supper, your breakfast or whatever, take a few minutes and take stock of, how do I feel right now? Did I have a headache before I ate that? Did my stomach hurt before I ate that?
Mm-hmm.
Does my head hurt now? Does my stomach hurt now?
Yeah.
I ate, we used to buy these one protein bars, and by the store you had to get them at, the price and everything, you'd think they were amazing. They were made of gold. I did a 6-week stomach repair, gut repair plan, and I was working late one Friday night. I said to the wife, hey, I really need something. I got like 2 more hours left. Can you just drop something off? She goes, yeah. And she brought me one of those protein bars, and I ate that. And about 10 minutes later, I had a nasty headache, and I went, oh shit, I can't eat these anymore.
Right.
So just paying a little bit of attention like that can help a lot of that.
Yeah.
So many people are out of tune with their body, which that's another thing that you have to fight as a practitioner. When you bring someone back to balance,
yeah,
they'll fight you because it doesn't feel right.
Fully. It's foreign. It's totally foreign.
Uh-huh.
You're like, oh, that's well said, because people, I think true for everybody. We get, we like, our pain is our identity. Well, I'm used to not shitting, once a day. Like I'm used to the rhythms that we get attached to, even if they're not good for us, are very real. Like to get people to shift those things can be super tricky. Like,
change the mentality. You have to change the way you talk about it even.
Yeah.
Talk to yourself. One of my favorite mentors is a neuro-linguistic guy, and a lot of his training is just how you talk to yourself about your goals.
Mm-hmm.
So I shouldn't say I never, because that's something he would tell me not to do. But right. You got to stop doing things like that instead of saying, one day I'm going to feel better. Mm-hmm. He's like, no, when I feel better, because I'm doing this process, I can accomplish this goal.
Right.
One of the big things when I first started training 20-something years ago, I couldn't kneel down very well. I had some injuries from playing football and soccer on my right knee, and it was super uncomfortable. It was painful. After a couple years of training consistently, that didn't happen anymore. Right. My knee still hurts to this day. Almost any time I'm active, it hurts. But it doesn't have that oh shit factor anymore.
Right.
So definitely you can work through those things. Mm-hmm. And invoke that change, and just, it's a process, and you don't have to be identified by your condition. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've had patients stop coming because they wouldn't believe me.
Yeah.
They were feeling better,
Right.
I had a young lady with fibromyalgia. She just could not get over the fact that was probably a BS diagnosis to begin with.
Right.
And that she could feel better if she just followed these steps. Mm-hmm. It was not in her brain at all. She was an engineer. She had that engineer's mindset of, if I build it, AB,
Yeah. Very analytical.
She couldn't get there, so she stopped coming one day. Nothing I could do for her.
Yeah, and that's life, man. Yeah, you can't help everybody. Well, Cory, we're going to wrap up here. Thank you for everything you contributed and for all the work you're doing. I mean, functional medicine and Chinese medicine is so needed nowadays.
I love my job.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing, man. You're one of the few. I love what I'm doing too, and that's I consider ourselves very lucky and fortunate to be in that spectrum of people. So if people want to track you, follow you, check you out on social media, your website, whatever it is you do, where can people find you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so the website is the number 4 Paths Acu, PATHSACU.com. It's the same thing on Facebook, 4 Paths Acupuncture on Facebook.
Okay.
They could look up Cory Nyenhuis. I don't usually put people on my private page, but it's linked to all the business stuff.
Fair enough.
Yeah, 4 Paths Acupuncture, Integrative Health, Omaha, Nebraska, 402-515-2412.
Beautiful, man. Well, thank you again, man. If you guys want to look up Cory, please do. Obviously, you got a wealth of knowledge, and that's really cool that I appreciate that functional medicine, especially Chinese medicine, people that are using functional medicine, and I know quite a few. You have joined those ranks. Yeah, and it's incredibly helpful. So yeah, it's something to explore for everybody. So thank you for your time, man. Much appreciated.
Absolutely, Gray.
All right. Take care, man.